Welcome to podcast number 2 of Bass Talk with Hagen and Heyes. Today's topic is the music of Giovanni Bottesini. So, Susan Hagen, what was the first piece by Bottesini you ever played?
Well, David Hayes, how you doing today?
Very well, thank you. And you?
Good, thank you. The first piece I ever played was what I thought was his only elegy.
Hmm.
It turns out it's his third elegy, and I didn't realize. No, it was the first of three. Yes,
Yeah,
number
that's
one.
right. Yeah.
And I had no idea until maybe just a few years ago that there were three. And I loved it. Of course, I'm going to blame youth. I wasn't that young. But when I first heard elegy, I thought it was allergy. And I thought, this is so cool. He has allergies just like I do. And then I saw it printed and I said, oh, elegy. That is not the same thing, which is a little embarrassing. And now everybody knows. But I loved it. And I really was excited to play it because I had gone to a master class at a school in Brookline that my eventually to be teacher, Ed Barker, was giving. My current teacher at the time had said to me, you've got to go hear this. This is going to be amazing. And a fellow that I didn't know, but I eventually would become good friends with in Boston, played the second concerto. And it was the first time I'd heard that. First thing I'd ever heard by Bottesini. And I had gone with my best friend, and she and I were sitting there. And at the end, I just grabbed her arm and I said, I cannot die until I get to play this piece. So that week, I went to my teacher and I said, I know I'm not ready for this, but how do I deal with this? I have to play some Bottesini. So she gave me the elegy. And I loved it. It was beautiful. It's such a lovely piece, and it has a lot of what I call, when I teach it to my students, some of the classic Bottesini party tricks.
Yes.
It's just his beautiful writing and lots of harmonics and things all over the fingerboard. And oh, it was such a blast. Now, what about you? What was the first piece you played?
Surprisingly, the elegy, the first elegy.
Oh
It
my
was, I
gosh.
think at the time, this was towards the end of the 1970s. There really wasn't much published, really. It was really
Right.
quite difficult to get hold of the music. So I had this Italian edition, and the bass part was written at pitch, which
Yes.
made it twice as hard to learn because you then had to read it up an octave as well. But the
I,
first Puccini I ever played was some studies. Um, I had to play in an exam, and some of these studies were set repertoire. And there was a bass player here in the 50s called H. Samuel Sterling, and
oh,
he was
yes.
yeah, he did the Bach suites.
Yeah, we played those versions of the box suites all over the time here.
I have a lot of respect for him because it's amazingly he found keys that worked for all six. And how many
Yes.
hours must he have spent? And those he found a major publisher to publish them, so they've been in print for I think 70 years or something. It's amazing. So
Yeah.
he'd done this book of Bottesini studies on the method. So I'd started learning some of those. But the first solo piece was the elegy, and I've loved it ever since. The piece I played the most of Bottesini, I played it with piano, I played it in orchestral tuning, solo tuning, I played it with string quartet, I played it with orchestra. It's just fantastic. And it's a piece I love to teach because
Yeah.
I would say this is your first easy virtuoso piece.
Yes.
This is why you practice. This is why we spend all the hours talking about technique and bowing and where the bow sits on the string and which part of the bow you play on, because everything in this piece includes all those plus music.
Yes.
And it's great. And we've talked many times about it. I say to all my students, tell me 5 things about Bottesini,
Right.
so that when they play, they have some idea who he was, something know something about the piece, because you just know you played in a concert and somebody comes up afterwards and asks you something about Bottesini and you know nothing about him and you look
Right.
such an idiot. So I just make sure they do this, and it's such a fantastic teaching piece, as you know.
Yeah,
It's just and audiences love it.
they do.
Years ago, I used to play for a little choir, and at Christmas they had a Christmas concert, and it was much lighter music, and they had piano, bass, and drums because they had a sort of Christmas cantata. In the first half, it's solos, and it was so funny. They said to me, "Could I play something funny?" Because I was a bass player, obviously. Could I play something funny? And I said, "No, no, I can't play anything funny. I can play something good."
There you go.
And I know with Bottesini Elegy, it doesn't matter how bad the pianist is, I can
Right.
still play it. Because that's the other thing. You don't know the pianist.
Right.
So we did this, and I started rehearsing, and there was so much noise going on, and people talking, whatever. And within about four bars, four measures, it went silent,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody was listening because they were expecting me to play the elephant or
Right.
something funny. And
Yes.
suddenly, I was able to sing on the bass,
Yeah.
and that piece, I think, breaks down so many barriers. Really.
Yes. It does. It does. And so this is the first Bottesini piece that you tend to teach
Mm.
students also. Me too.
And the
Me too.
reverie is there as well.
Yes.
it's a different the difficulties are different with the reverie. It's
Yes.
but they're both fantastic pieces. The elegy, um, because it is originally a bass piece, so it fits much better. The reverie, I think, was a cello piece and a song.
Yeah.
So it doesn't quite fit as well, but it's still a glorious piece.
Yeah. That's the second piece that I'll usually teach, but I'll do the elegy first. And
Yes.
one of the things I sort of joke about with my students, they know I'm only half kidding, is, I explain an elegy is a musical eulogy and what that would mean. And I always hope that they've never been through losing a loved one, but, by the time I have my students in college, they usually
Mm.
have. And
Yes.
I say to them, I'm part Italian. Bottesini was Italian. So I'm going to just tell you right now, all the stages of grief are in this.
Mm.
There's the sadness. There are moments of remembering the funny times. So there's a little laughter. There's anger. There's all of it. And at the end, there's just that resignation to this person is gone.
Mm.
And I said to them, you want not just no dry eyes left in the house. I said, you want everyone at the end to be exhausted because of the emotional roller coaster you've taken them on. And and they laugh, and then I show them where I think the different stages of grief are and what
Yes.
they are in the piece. And I say, you can come up with your own version of it, but you've got to bring us through. So they've got, like you said, they've got the technique is required, and then the musicality,
Yes.
all of it, the big picture, the small microcosms within. And I love teaching this piece, and I love the little harmonics at the end of the fingerboard. Da 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 dum ba dum ba da dum. I love when they get it,
Mm.
because everything just comes together. And every time a student finally gets that passage, I feel like it's not just a weight has been lifted off their shoulders, but they look at me like, I get the bass now. I know where all this stuff is. And
Yeah.
oh, it's just so much fun. And to hear the bass sing that way is great.
It was funny with those harmonics. I always say to my students, because you play it twice. So if you get it right the first time, you then have to try and get it right the second time. If you get it
Right.
wrong the first time,
You have a second shot.
wow, yes. So it's amazing. But
I tell them that too.
it's such a good piece. It
It
just
is.
teaches everything. And one of the things I always tell them is that Bottesini spent much of his life in the opera house. So
Right.
everything he writes is operatic. So it's
Yes.
all about singing. It's about
Yeah.
phrasing and how to shape a phrase and how to color the different phrases. And it's such a good piece. And I think students play better with that piece almost than they can,
Yes.
because it's
Yes.
such a good piece. It really pushes every ounce of what they're trying to achieve as a bass player. It's really good. And you were saying about you didn't know there were three elegies.
No, had no
Well,
clue. I also didn't know he had written the method books, the
yeah,
books of
but the
etudes.
amazing thing about the elegies was the third one was published, but under the title Melody. So that was published in
Ah,
France. So none of it
okay.
knew it was elegy number three.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second elegy also had a second title, Romanza Drammatica. So
Mm,
I've gone back to elegy number one, elegy two, three in my
yeah.
publications, and then with the additional title.
That's so smart.
But
That's
they
very
are
smart.
fantastic, and each one is totally different.
They
I
are.
learned the third one because my teacher, Franciszek Costa, had
Mm.
recorded that one, and I played that in my final recital at the Royal College of Music. Um, and it was amazing. I heard him play it the Isle of Man competition in 1982. And I was just a student then at Royal College of Music. And Sarah and I were there. We were walking on the cliff top one day, and we saw Francesco Posta walking the other way towards us. And he said, I've got a rehearsal at 4 o'clock if you want to come and hear. I thought, wow, yeah, we'd love to. I was, I don't know, 4 feet away from this great player. I
Amazing.
never heard playing like it. It was
Yeah.
impeccable. The sound was stunning. The phrasing was fantastic. The intonation was amazing. He was just, and he was playing on a borrowed bass. That was the other thing. It
That's
was
amazing.
unbelievable. And just remembered it was like a turning point in my life,
Yeah.
really, because I'd heard lots of great players, but maybe this was talking to me differently. This was saying something different to me.
Right.
And that's why I wanted to study with him, because it was it was all technique, but at the service of music.
Yes.
You have to hide your technique. Music is first.
Right. Right. And I think that's partially because of all of, and one of the things I love about Bottesini is everything is so vocal,
Mm,
and it's the music first. But it's
mm,
it's fun to play because you really try to make the double bass sound like a voice.
yes.
And when you do it right, everything just resonates just so beautifully. And that's
Mm,
one of the things I love about. I think that might be why I love Bottesini's music so much. Is it's so vocal. It's got all of these singing qualities at all times. It's just amazing. And I'll say to my students now, I'll explain that he wrote operas, he conducted operas, it
yes.
was, friends with Verdi on all of this. And I'll say, now imagine, because this is one of the, I think, the coolest things about Bottesini is, at intermission of an opera,
Mm,
he'd just pick up the bass and play an aria
mm,
that he's created from something within the opera.
yeah.
And it's just, I mean, that's to me something beyond any capability I would ever have to just come up with these beautiful pieces. But I think it's really good. My students at Berkeley understand the idea of like,
Mm,
he might have improvised this from an aria he heard a few minutes ago. And
yes.
they get that because they can do that
Yes. Yeah.
improvisational stuff. So it's very cool. Now,
And
how?
I
Yeah.
also tell my students as well. One of mine is just playing the Grand Allegro,
Mm,
which is an amazing piece. But I think Bottesini's probably greatest piece. And even now, audiences are astounded by what the bass can do. And I said,
yeah.
imagine in 1870 how it must
Right.
have sounded. It must have
Yeah.
been like a complete revolution. It's like he's from Mars or something.
Right.
Because he was the only one doing this. I'm sure there weren't many others of this
No.
level. And
Yeah.
he was just a superstar of his day. It was absolutely amazing. And the music has survived. And also, it's always because, there's a reason why it survived. Maybe it's because it's quite good.
It is quite good.
It could
I
be that.
I remember when I got to college, I said to my teacher, I know I'm not ready, but I want to be ready soon. I have to play that second concerto. I need to do it. And he looked at me and he sort of, I could see him assessing. And he said, well, if you practice really hard, you can do the Grand Duo Concertante. My sister is a violinist and she was in
Yes.
school with me. So I worked really, really hard. And before I got to play the concerto, I did the Grand Duo with
Wow.
her. And it was great. We did it on her recital at school. We did it on my recital at school. Then we got to do it with an orchestra
Mm.
that was, in the Boston area. And then I just saw a memory on Facebook that 10 years ago this summer, we did it with the Harvard University Summer School Orchestra. And
Right.
it is such a fun piece.
Mm.
It's just, and of course, getting to play it with my own sister was also super fun. But I remember thinking, if this is what my teacher thinks is the booby prize, because
Yes.
he didn't think I was quite ready for the concerto yet, what a prize! That was amazing.
I bought a copy of the Grand Duo when I was at school.
Mm,
And I can remember, occasionally I get the music out on the music stand and I try and play. I couldn't play one note, because when your technique isn't up into thumb position, you don't know how to
oh
play
yeah,
any of this. And
yeah,
then once I got to the level where I could play it, I remember, and I always played from memory. And I remember, and I haven't got a photographic memory, but I can see where I am on the page, which page I'm on,
yes,
and I know where the page turns are and all these things.
right.
And I remember this is about 16 pages and playing it with great violinist and with orchestra, and just how quickly these pages just flew by.
Oh
I was
yeah,
absolutely astounded at how quickly it went. But once
yes.
you get to a certain level, lots of these Bottesini things, all the
Hmm.
tricks keep coming
Hmm.
back. And
Oh
that's the
yeah,
nice thing. And uh, the Grand Duo always really annoys violinists because um, you're not supposed to be able to play anything as a bass player. You should just be playing in half position and playing the elephant.
right.
And the audiences can see what you're doing. On a violin, you're expected to play 32 notes per bow.
Right.
We're not expected to fly around the bass.
No.
But it's amazing how the bass player always gets to shine
Oh,
more
it's
than the
so true.
violinist.
It's true. And I'm so glad that I played it with my sister because there were two main things that I recall from that experience. The first one, she stopped in the middle of a rehearsal and she looked at me, she said, "Are you playing higher than I am? Is that even allowed?" And the other one was every time we've performed it, people come backstage to meet the soloists, and I feel a little bad because people tend to come to the bass player because they're just amazed that, we've got almost 4 feet of strings that we've been covering through this whole concerto all over the place. And they look at the violin and they're like, oh, wonderful job. You played great. But they have a million questions for the bass player. And I thought, thank God this is my sister because she knows me. She loves me. I think she'll forgive me.
I've had exactly the same,
Yeah.
exactly the same. After every concert we've done the Grand Duo, they
Yeah.
always come to me.
Hmm.
Having said that, I'm always the one who introduces the concert, and I'll always introduce the piece. I'll always say something funny and get them laughing, and
That's
that one
good.
helps. But also,
Yes.
people expect a violinist to be good. They don't.
Right.
They don't expect the bass player to be flying around the
Not
bass
at
playing all
all.
these harmonics. But
Not at all.
I think it's one of my favorite Bottesini pieces. I think for
Hmm.
performing, but I think as the best piece, I think is the Grand Allegro, which I think is
That is
stuck.
great.
Except that our accompanist at Wells, they're really annoyed with it that he's taken so much of the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto and just called it Bottesini.
I think that's what's great about it. Your story about the duo reminds me of when I was performing it. I was not memorizing it.
Mm,
But we were in a rehearsal of, I guess it was a lesson with my teacher, and Jody and I, my sister and I, were both playing. And we got through, and he stopped us somewhere. He said, "Okay, at the part where it goes like this," and I started flipping my pages.
yes.
And he said, "Wait a second, are you not using the music?" I said, "Well, I mean, I have it here, but there's so many page turns that really, once I get past like the first 4 pages, I'm kind of good. I don't really need it, and there's not a lot of time to turn the page with the addition that we had."
Yeah.
And he looked at me like I was nuts. But like you said, the pages just go flying by. So it's better to not have to turn all of them.
I know, I know. I've loved doing it. I've done it with orchestra. I've done it with piano. I've done it, I think, with string quartets as
So much
well.
fun.
And it works
Yeah.
so well. And just it's such an audience piece, isn't it?
It is. They love
He,
it. They love it.
he was a real showman, Bottesini. He
Oh,
knew
yeah.
how to get the audience on his side.
He did. And I think maybe the reason why we both learned that first elegy first and we teach it first, that to me gives you almost all the tools that you need to play any of his other pieces. I will point out, oh, this is in his first concerto, this is in his second
Mm,
concerto, this is in the grand duo. It's really, really neat. And I thought it was fascinating that I didn't know about the Reverie
mm,
until I was in my 20s, and I was told about it by a tuba player.
yes.
And he said to me, "So I hear you're practicing the concerto. What are you going to do?" I was performing it with an orchestra. He said, "What
Mm.
are you going to do as an encore?" I was like, "I don't know. An encore? Like, is anyone even going to want to need to hear more?" Um, and he said to me, "What about the Reverie?"
Mm,
And I was like, "Well, what Reverie? What are you talking about?" So I hunted it down
mm,
and I thought, "Oh, this is beautiful." And I found string parts
mm.
and I had the orchestra play it with me
Oh, that's fantastic.
as an encore. And it was really funny because as always happens, some older man in the audience came up afterwards. As a female bass player, you always get a couple of older men, sometimes a little creepy, sometimes totally not creepy at all. This one guy came up and he grabbed my arm and he said, "This reverie, I know you had someone on your mind when you were playing it. Tell me the story." And I thought, "No way, creeper. I don't even know you." But instead, I said to him, "Well, I did just tell you the story through my bass."
Yes.
And I kind of just squirmed out of his grip and moved on to the next person in the line. But the pieces are so great. Now, tell me about the second concerto.
That one, the first edition I had was by Rudolf Mallerich. It's a
Oh,
Vienna
mine
piece.
too.
Yeah, and it had, I think, many mistakes, all hand copied, wasn't it?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and again, I bought that at school.
Me too.
And the first movement I always teach from that one is the slow movement because it's such
Yes.
a good piece.
It's the first
But
movement I learned from that piece too.
and in 1989, I went over to Belfast and we did a Bottesini concert at Belfast University.
Oh, nice.
And it's with little chamber orchestra, and Sarah sang, and I played. And my great friend Mark Gibson, he was a neurologist, but really
Mm,
fantastic bass player, and he organised the concert. So we did the Passione, and I orchestrated it with the orchestra, and I did the
nice.
elegy, and we did I think Boucher, and
Mm-hmm.
I did the third movement of the second concerto, the first time I played it,
Mm.
and it was, oh, wow, what a great piece.
So much fun, that movement.
But the cadenza in that first movement, I think, is probably the best bass cadenza ever written. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I just absolutely
Yes.
love it. And I I think it's called the second concerto because it's published second,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not sure it is. It had on the manuscripts. It's called concertino rather than concerto, and
Yeah.
it's also in two keys. It's in B minor, which is for solo tuning, but also in C
Right.
minor because sometimes Bottesini used the minor third tuning. Um,
Mm.
so it's I'm not sure it is a second concerto, and he didn't
Ah,
very often date his manuscripts, so we don't know when they were written.
right.
And also,
Ah,
then they've often been two or three different editions or
right.
versions because
Right.
maybe he went on tour, forgot to take it, so just rewrote it. Isn't that amazing? The
Just
facility.
the skills.
I once read a fantastic book about, I think it's Mozart letters, been
Hmm.
translated into English. And there's one fantastic letter, and he'd gone somewhere, and he said, I'd forgotten to bring a piano concerto, so I wrote one. And you just, wow, wow, you can't believe it. And
Oh, I
I
love
bet
that.
the facility was there, and I bet
Oh,
he
yeah.
just sat down and wrote it.
Yeah. Well,
Wow, amazing.
well, I think you could do that though.
I don't think I could, but thank you. Thank, thank you for
Um,
your support. Yeah, I don't think I
no,
could.
I have faith that if it was needed, you'd be able to do it. But that second concerto, I'll tell you, when I finally got to start learning it in school, I was so excited. I used the same edition that you use,
Yes.
and I found it a little bit hard to read. I didn't mind the transposing an octave; that didn't bother me at all. But it was handwritten and kind of small, so I
Yes.
went down to like the local photocopy place and I blew it up huge. I mean, like probably 10 by 15
Mm.
inches on thick, thick, thick cardstock.
Yes.
And I brought it into my lesson, and Ed Barker said to me, he sort of took a step back. He looked like I'd given him an electric shock, and he said, "Well, what is this?" I said, "Well, this is the Bottesini. I have really good eyesight.
Mm.
That's the one of my gifts that I have. I have many gimpy other things, like I referenced allergies and stuff, but I said to him, although my eyesight is great, it's small, and
Mm.
I know you're going to give me bowings and phrasings and fingerings,
Mm.
and there's nowhere to put them." So
Yes.
I had blown the part up. So I still have that, and it's the most marked up, disgusting thing you could ever see. It. My students have trademarked it. My disgustingly marked up copy when I send them
Really.
music. I don't even look at it anymore, but it's there in case of necessity if I ever need it for a reason. I was so excited to get to play it. And I
Mm.
started with that second movement. And
Yes.
oh, I thought, oh, that was so great. And then that first movement, which for American orchestras is going to be on like every audition ever. And so I knew I
Yes.
had to learn it well. And I had the recital for school coming up. It was looming. And so I learned the third movement. And I remember feeling like I'd sort of just slammed it together. I knew it wasn't as good as it needed to be, but it was
Yes.
learned and I was okay with that. Then I've since performed it with I think 7 different orchestras. And
Wow.
each it's really fun, and each time I play it, I fall in love with that third movement even more.
Yes.
And I've decided I have a storyline. Are you ready for this? This is so bad. So that third movement to me is a carnival.
Right.
And I don't know if you've ever read the book or seen the movie Charlotte's Web,
Yes.
but there's okay, so the rat
Yeah.
Templeton,
Mm. Yeah.
the bass player is the rat. He's
Mm.
running around and doing everything and getting into, dancing and eating and all of these things. So I call it the Adventures of Templeton. But when I play it, one of the things I love to do with the orchestra, and they think I'm doing it to make their lives easier, but I'm
Yes.
really not. I say to them, you just play steadily through the whole movement. I will skirt in and out. I will line up with you with all the important stuff. It will never sound chaotic, but I am very free in that movement, which people who know me know that I'm usually strict tempo lady. Like
Yes.
I
Yeah.
sit there with a metronome clicking the whole time. And this movement is so much fun because I feel like I get to dance around that a little bit. I try to keep it
Yes.
tasteful, but it's really fun. I try to keep it tasteful.
Not as you think so.
I know, I'm not sure it is, but it's really fun. And as much as I love that first movement and I teach that movement a ton, the second movement a ton, I think I love that third movement the most. It's really exciting and fun.
When I played the third movement with orchestra, and then I played the second movement with orchestra, and
Hmm.
finally, I've only ever played it once with orchestra. I played many concertos, but this concerto I've only ever played once with
Hmm.
orchestra. And I love the first movement
That's
because I
beautiful.
think that's what bass playing is all about in that
Oh,
move.
absolutely. And I
Um,
think that's why it's on auditions.
yes,
It's can you sing through the bass?
yeah, and it's about pure technique. It's
Yeah.
really using the
Yeah.
entire range, and you
Yes.
just think, wow, Bottesini was such a star, just a superstar,
Brilliant.
really, to just write all these fantastic pieces, which are still the very heart of the repertoire today.
Yes, still pieces that people strive for. Every semester at Berkeley, at least three or four of my private students will come to me and say, I want to play something by Bottesini, anything by
Yes,
Bottesini.
yeah,
About 10 years ago, I discovered, I thought it was so brilliant, the books of etudes that he wrote.
yeah.
And so those are a little bit of a booby prize for the students who just aren't quite ready.
Mm.
But there are some of those that are quite lyrical. I think you transcribed one of them in one of your collections of music too, the Andante Cantabile.
Oh, that one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was just a study from the method.
Yeah.
I changed the key. I can't remember.
Yes, you did. It's beautiful. The key that you put it in, it lies beautifully on the instrument. My students love it. So when
Was it
they
one of the
come to,
bass clef books?
it was one of the bass clef. I think it's the
Yeah,
first unaccompanied bass clef book.
yeah, there was one study which one of my teachers always loved, and when I played it, he wrote soulful at the top of
Mm.
the thing, and he said, you could play this in a concert, you get a piano accompaniment, and I always
Right.
remember that. This is 40 years later, and I still remember it. I think it was that one,
Yeah,
and it's
it's
just such a
beautiful.
lovely study, and
And
again, it's you're having to tell the whole story with no accompaniment. You are soloist and
right.
accompanist at the same
Yes.
time.
It's beautiful and it's great because I would thumb through those method books and try to
Mm,
find the prettier ones.
yes.
But now you've transcribed this one, you've put it in a great key, and oh, my students love it. And they're so excited because they're getting to play something from Bottesini's. Some of my students aren't quite ready for the
Mhm.
concerto, or even the elegy can be a stretch for some of them. And that's not saying anything bad about them. It's just they're not ready for it yet.
Mm,
But this makes them feel like they haven't missed out.
exactly.
And I love it. It's great. And the key that you put it in, they just have to go a little bit into the lower parts of thumb position and then they're out so it's not too scary for them.
What key did I put it into? I can't remember.
That's what I have to remember. It'll come to me in a moment. It really will.
I think I did the same with an Adolf Lotter study.
Yes, you did.
And again,
Yes.
in his method book, Practical Tutor, it's quite low down. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I put it up a sixth. I think it
think
went
you
from A
did.
minor to F sharp minor.
Yeah.
And it's just to prove that you can still play an F sharp minor or F sharp major or any of these keys, and it works.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So this is in, what's it in now? D minor. It's beautiful. It's number 14 in your bass clef unaccompanied solos book one.
Right. Oh, I'll have a look at that. I've forgotten
It's
it.
great. Oh, I love it. It's really lovely. Um, and the latter, I've played in both keys.
Mm.
And I like your transcription of that. I think it lies really,
I'm
really
going to put a
nicely.
book together of studies from his method because it's sort of fallen by the wayside. I wrote a blog the other day about him, and I bought part of his collection. Yeah, he's been
That's
dead.
right.
I don't know, 60 years, 70 years. And so I got the medals and manuscripts and photographs and things. And he was important in his day, even though he's sort of forgotten now. Um, so
Aren't
yeah,
there a lot of people like that? I think we should do another podcast on the important people that we've forgotten,
yes, I
but
think
we're,
good idea.
Czerny and Lauter.
Mhm.
I think there's a bunch of them.
Yeah, we should. I think that'll be a really good idea. But
Yeah.
Bottesini has survived because it's great music.
It's great music, and I think because he knew how to play the bass. He
Mm,
also knew how to write operas. So
yes.
he really understood singing, and I think he, of all the composers of his time and beyond, really got the bass to sing in a way that the audiences love and are surprised by.
But he was the first one. It was amazing, really, because everybody else in Central Europe was still writing scales and arpeggios,
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
bits in little tunes in harmonics and a few double stops and whatever.
Right.
And then
Right.
suddenly Bottesini was making the bass sing.
He
I wonder
was.
where he got that from.
Well, didn't they call him Paganini of the double bass?
They did,
So
but
maybe just the fact that he had this innate technical capacity.
um,
He could play the bass, just physically play it so well. It opened up the doors for him to be
maybe.
more musical.
A friend of his, Luigi Arditi, a violinist,
Mm.
he said that I think Bottesini graduated early. I think he left 2 years early from the Milan Conservatoire. And he said when he left, he was as good then as he ever was. He said the only thing he gained was experience.
Well,
Wow.
experience is good.
Yeah, not bad, is it?
Not bad at all.
Oh,
Well, this is such a fun topic. I could talk about Bottesini for days. I know I could. But this is great. And thank you for suggesting this topic. I think it's great. It's
well,
wonderful.
he's at the heart. Bottesini is still at the heart of everything we teach and play, really, which is fantastic, and I'm sure always will be. I can't believe this will ever go out of fashion.
No, I don't think so. The music is just so beautiful. It seems so timeless.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's nice now to create new editions. It's
it is.
suddenly, it's now possible to find all Bottesini's music
And
available in all the different tunings.
I think it's less overwhelming too for people to see it, not in little tiny handwritten manuscript
Yes,
and then having, I don't mind transposing by an octave, but it's a lot for some people.
it
And
is.
so to have it printed cleanly,
Mm.
exactly where it needs to be played, I think that's going to make it even more accessible to more people, which is good.
Yeah, I've enjoyed creating lots of new editions. I've still got quite a few pieces still to go. But I think Bolero is next, and that's next on my list.
Okay, so we're
Uh,
relying on you.
but you don't have to, but thank you.
Well, thank you for listening to Bass Talk with Hagen and Hayes. We hope you join us at our next episode. And thank you to our sponsors. Oh, we don't have any. Would you like to be our sponsor? Let us know. You can reach out to us. And thank you. We can't wait to talk to you again for our next episode. Stay well.
Bye.